start. There we go. So, hello everyone, and thank you very much for joining us at Valo Fest. I know we're starting 2 minutes late, and I want to make sure our amazing presenter gets all of the time that she needs for this session, so I'll keep it super short. Please make sure you're on mute during the meeting. If you have any questions, either raise your hand inside Teams or type them inside of the chat, and I will tell you when you can speak up, or if not, I'll just read the question from the chat. And the session will be recorded, so if you want to share it with your colleagues afterwards, everybody will be sent a link to the recording on YouTube so you can share it. So that's it for me. I think I managed to do it under 60 seconds. So Corinne, I'll leave the stage to you.
Great. Well, thank you very much. And thank you to Valo for this fantastic event. It's quite a feat to take on. And so congratulations to all the people behind the scenes that put on an amazing digital event like this. So I'm here to talk about, eventually when my screen shares, there we go. I'm here to talk about why diversity and inclusion is good for business. You know, it was interesting to hear Chris near the end of his previous session talking about accessibility and diversity and inclusion and how it can be really, really great for your business. And we're going to dive a little bit deeper in that. So first, you can't see me, but now you can see what I look like. I'm definitely not Stan Lee. I'm not the dog, but a little bit about me. So I've been in the tech industry for over 25 years. I've essentially spent my entire career here, and I do a number of things throughout my day. So one, I am the co-founder and executive director, one of the co-founders of the Witte Network, which is a global not-for-profit focused on women in tech, and I'll tell you a little bit about that in a minute. I'm also the president of a consulting organization called Sharp Perspective, where we work with a lot of ISVs and tech companies on their go-to-market strategies, particularly as it relates to indirect selling, you know, how you go to market with partners, channels, and alliances. And there's a bit of a channel theme here. I'm also the president of the Canadian Channel Chiefs Council, which is made up of channel leaders in the tech industry, large and small. And there's a couple of other kind of interesting facts about me. I homeschool our 15-year-old son, Liam. I'm a golden doodle dog mom for those dog moms are out there. And as I said, I live in Canada. So I live just outside of Toronto and I've spent my whole life here. And a COVID fun fact, something I decided to take on while we're kind of stranded in our homes for the last several months, is I've taken up paint by numbers. You know, the paint by numbers that you did when you were a kid. But what's really cool is you can actually send in pictures, like actual photographs, and they'll send you back the whole map and grid and painting kit. And you can see one that I'm working on in this below picture. And then I'm a geek and a nerd, you know, having a 15-year-old son who's into Marvel and superheroes. You know, this is a treasured picture of our family at one of the fan expos here in Canada that we actually had a family portrait done with Stan Lee before he passed on. So that's a little bit about me. You can't see me, but now you see a little bit. I'm you know, a redhead, and that's who I am. So a little bit about the Witte Network and why I'm so passionate about diversity and inclusion. So the Witte Network was formed in 2018 as a global not-for-profit. We've got over 3,000 members around the world, and we do three things. And when I say around the world, we're in 50 countries, 80 communities. And it's how do we encourage more women of all ages and stages pursue careers in tech and education in STEM. And for those that are already here, how can we help them achieve their goals and dreams in tech, those future leadership roles, amazing projects, maybe it's get on a board of directors or make it into the C-suite. And then working with companies who truly want to change the landscape of gender equality and overall diversity and inclusion within their organization. We do that globally and locally. We do a lot of education, we do webinars, we do leadership programs. We've been offering Azure Fundamentals tech training for women. We'll have over 130 women trained in that certificate course, as well as leadership courses by end of June. And when we were able to have local events, we were having them around the world, and now we've moved to digital, just like Valo has. So what are we going to talk about today? So what is this diversity and inclusion thing? And I put that in quotes, all about. And sometimes we hear, well, I'm not a manager or leader, so why should I care? And then what is truly the difference between diversity and inclusion and belonging? Because you really shouldn't have one without the other. And I'll share a number of stories. I'm a bit of a storyteller, so I'll share lots of stories along the way. And then I have 10 best practices for your company or your team or the group that you work with within your organization. And I'm happy to take questions along the way. So if there's something that pops up that's relevant to a slide, feel free to interrupt me and I'm happy to do that. So for those of you who like stats and evidence, I always ground our conversations in that. And diversity is good for business. It's proven, whether you're Forbes, McKinsey, there's all sorts of research and studies out there that it's double-digit increases, whether it's revenue or profitability, when you have diverse management teams, when you have gender diversity in your management and leadership teams. And this is the business environment we're in right now. We're the first time we've had 5 generations of people working in our organization. So think about that, 5 generations of people in some companies around the world as people are looking to retire out or just love their job and think that retirement is never going to happen, as well as young people looking to enter the workforce. And millennials, which some of the older generations say, those millennials, well, those millennials are in their mid-30s now. And they truly believe when there's a culture of inclusion, that there's more creativity and innovation going on. And we all know in the tech industry, when there's more innovation and creativity, or any industry, quite frankly, it means great solutions and products for your customers. And I'll talk a little bit about the gender gap, but it's not only about gender. And this was a stat that was before COVID, but that if we could close that gender gap, it would be a huge impact to the global economy. And I still believe that once we come out of this crisis that we're in right now. And so you can just think about, from a good for business standpoint, there's higher employee engagement. You see the stats here from revenue and profitability, and none of those things change. And if you think of what's happening during COVID, and these aren't my stats, these are stats that are coming out from research that's happening. What's interesting is countries where they've had female leaders, they're thought to be facing the pandemic slightly more successfully. And some of the early thinking is that's because women tend to have more empathy and they tend to manage things around health and wellness and similar to their families slightly differently. Yet on the flip side, a negative stat is that 25% of D&I leaders, or inclusion and diversity leaders, believe their organizations have put these initiatives on hold because of the pandemic. And isn't this the time that, although we have lots of layoffs and furloughs, that we don't want to take the eye off the ball of our diversity, inclusion, and belonging focus areas? And McKinsey recently did a study and talked about how with automation and technology, which is a great thing, it's also going to displace a lot of workers. And that's going to take a greater toll on women and minorities, to the point they said 160 million women around the globe will have to retrain or become more tech savvy or look for new ways to find jobs and careers by 2030, which is less than 10 years away. And, again, there is so much in the news right now about systematic racism within our Black communities. And there is a toll that's taken on pay equity, jobs, and layoffs with our Black brothers and sisters, not only just in the US, but around the world. So Glassdoor, put your hand up if you've heard of Glassdoor. I know, I'm just kidding. Well, you can still put your hand up. But this is a really interesting site that employees, past or current, can go and rate their current employee on all sorts of different metrics. And when you look at it, 67% are saying a diverse workforce is important to them. So when you think about your current employees and retention and prospective employees and looking at your organization, do you really look like a company they want to work for? And that rises almost to 90% if the job seeker is Black, Asian, or Latino. And then you can see the stats here is that most feel their company is not doing enough, or their leadership team is not diverse, or they don't even know if their company is doing something around diversity and inclusion initiatives. So let's talk a little bit why that happens. So here's one of my stories coming in. So I love watching people, or human watching, as I like to call it. And this is a GO train, which is one of the transit systems in the Toronto area. And this is how I would get into the city, as many would use public transit when they get into the larger center cores. And so one day I was on the GO train, and you're just observing, as many of us do. And I was watching an older couple. And, it was kind of cute. This older couple were holding hands. And, oftentimes we think when you get older, you may not be as affectionate as you always were. So it was kind of nice for me to see that and look forward to that in my senior years. And then a few stops later, a parent gets on the train and they're trying to get the pram or the stroller, depending on where you're from. You'll use different words for their stroller. And the baby was fussy and crying. And this poor parent was just embarrassed, as people were, staring and wanting their peace and solitude as they went into the city. And then a few stops later, there were a group of teens, and they were rowdy, and they were playing music, and they were putting their feet on their chairs. So what went from kind of a lovely, seeing this romantic scene right through to, a crying baby and ruckus teens, but it was interesting to see all that. So I'd like you to use the chat window, and our famous moderator can help me with this. Describe the older couple to me. So if people can describe the older couple and put that in the chat window for me, please. I'm not sure. I can't see the chat window anymore, and I'm not able to open it up. So
I am watching it for you, Corinne, so don't worry. As soon as there's any answers, I'll let you know.
Okay. Someone's got to be brave enough and describe that older couple. I'll wait just a minute. Let's see. Or you can describe the parent with the fussy baby, or the group of teens. Pick one. And what was the visual that was in your mind when I described those amazing people to you? Are we getting any interaction?
It looks like people didn't have their morning coffee yet, or they're maybe a bit too shy.
Okay. Well,
if we don't get anything in 2 minutes, I'll start calling people out.
That's okay. We'll move forward, because so most people, when I've delivered this presentation in a kind of a live setting, they describe the older couple as a heterosexual couple. That's what's in their mind. When in actual fact, it was two elderly gentlemen, gay gentlemen. But that's when you just describe the story and you can't see them. We all have preconceived notions of who that couple could be. The parent with a fussy baby, how many of you thought it was the mom? When in actual fact, it was the dad. And there's some gender bias that goes on when we describe those scenarios. And the group of teens, how many of you thought they were boys? Because I used the words ruckus and loud music. When in actual fact, they were a group of girls and a group of white girls. And so what this is all about our bias and how we need to check ourselves sometimes on our own biases that come with us. And it's not that it's right or wrong that you thought that way, but how do those biases translate into our business, our families, our communities, and our homes? So I just wanted to, it's a fun exercise. And I recommend, if you do anything within your teams, your organization on gender bias, you can use this exact same example as just a lesson about bias in your own teams. So let's talk a little bit about a few of the biases that go on in an organization, or quite frankly, anywhere. And we'll start with gender imbalance. So there's lots of stats out there, and even jokes that are not funny, that there's more CEOs named John than there are women in CEO positions. And while we are seeing some shifts in leadership roles and more gender parity, or more women getting into these leadership roles, we're still really, really far away from that. And so I've got a little story that is about gender bias with even senior women that take place. So I met a woman a couple of years ago, and she's a lawyer, a mergers and acquisitions lawyer, actually. And she was about to go into one of the largest negotiations she'd ever done in her career. So she's partner level, so a very senior woman. And she entered into a room. This isn't her. This is a picture of Mad Men for those who have seen that show. But she entered into the room, and on one side of the table were the opposing counsel. There was about 6 or 7 of them. And when she entered the room, the first thing they did was ask for coffee and proceeded to give her their coffee orders. Now, I've already told you who this woman was, and she could have gone in many different directions. She could have said, oh, well, I'm this person and I'm here to negotiate on behalf of my client who have not arrived yet. She could have got angry, but instead, she took their coffee orders, left the room, brought them back their coffees, then turned around and sat at the opposite side of the table, introduced herself and said, here, I'm opposing counsel, ready to negotiate. So that's some gender bias that happened right there, that they just assumed that she was the coffee girl, when in actual fact, she was a very senior woman. Now, it did put her in a more favorable negotiating spot, but these type of things happen all day long. Even I've been in meetings as you know, senior level, where they've looked to me and said, has lunch been ordered? And often as the only woman at the table have said, did you just ask me that because I'm a woman? And then there's some cowering. But there's a lot of that that goes on. And let's talk a little bit about pay equity. There's a huge wage disparity between men and women, whether you're an hourly wage or whether you're in a bonus situation. If you're a person of color, it's even a greater pay gap than the 32% that you see here. And for those that you know, maybe haven't heard this story of Octavia Spencer and Jessica Chastain for the movie Help, which was an amazing movie, it was identified through the grapevine that Octavia, who's a fabulous actress, was making significantly, and when I say significant, you've probably heard some of these stories in the news, significantly less for her leading role than Jessica Chastain. And Jessica admitted that she had no idea that these wage disparities took place. And so she could have taken lots of different approaches, but she took the opportunity to stand together and said, we're not moving forward with the production of this film until everyone is paid the same as it relates to the level of role that they had in the movie. And while this is a Hollywood story, this goes on all the time in any size of business, which is the pay disparity that can take place. Around the world, there's countries where some women only get 6 weeks off or a couple of months off for maternity leave. In Canada, we get a year off, in some countries even greater. And that means those women tend to miss those promotion or pay increase that compounds year over year. And so next thing you know, they really could be 30 to 50% in a pay gap in comparison to a peer where they're doing the exact same job. And so what would you do in this situation if you found out a peer of yours doing the same job at the same level was paid significantly less? Would you stand by him or her? Would you be silent out of fear? Or would you try to do something about it for them and to be a greater company? And these are questions that you need to ask whether you're at a leadership level or even an individual contributor in an organization. The next area, and Chris talked about that in this last session, if you were in the last session, was around people with unique abilities, which I like to call unique abilities or disabilities. And around 10% of the world's population live with some form of disability, and that disability could be visible or invisible. And then in Canada alone, and I know this is a bit of an older stat, but it hasn't gone down, more than 1 in 10 people aged 15 to 24 have some form of disability. And this is our future workforce. And so here's some interesting things. So I'm not sure if any of you know who this is, but this is Satoshi Tajiri. And he has Asperger's, had Asperger's. He was the mastermind behind Pokemon, probably one of the most famous video games, card games that many have played, both boys and girls, and now adults as well. But he probably didn't show up very well in an interview and started his own amazing company. Stephen Hawking, who has ALS. And some people, there's a lot of discrimination with people who have disabilities because they believe it impacts their functions. When in actual fact, Stephen is one of the smartest and was one of the most smartest people in the world. And then you move on to Steve Jobs. And many say he was clearly on autism spectrum, who went on to do amazing things. Kim Peek, for those who have seen a movie that was around a long time ago, the movie was Rain Man. So this man had very little fine motor skills to the point that he could not button up his shirt. Yet he could recall the contents of 12,000 books. And if you think of that skill, that unique ability that Kim has, could that be important in development or QA or lots of different roles within your organization? And this is my friend Rob Buren, who broke his back in a cycling accident a number of years ago. And while he's in a wheelchair, he's one of the bravest and most goal-oriented guys I've ever met. You know, he had a goal of I'm gonna cross the Kona Ironman challenge. And he had to achieve multiple Ironman even to get an invitation to go in this race. And he worked so hard, his work ethic is huge, and crossed the finish line second in that category. Would you hire him for his tenacity? Would you give him a chance? Would your office even be able to be accessible for him to come in? Dan Aykroyd, Ghostbuster, Canadian actor, has admitted that he has Asperger's, which many people with an invisible disability are, sometimes fearful to even admit. Said that it was a skill for him that allowed him to study his lines and memorize those lines faster and easier than anybody else on set. And finally, Stephen Wiltshire. He had trouble getting a role, yet he could draw any landscape after only seeing it once. Think about these skills that these people have and what we hear. And there's some companies that have done an amazing job of changing their interview tactics, welcoming people in to learn about them and learn about their skills in different ways than the traditional interview style, so they can truly understand the value that they can provide to an organization. And while there's more work to be done, I think it's just a true opportunity. A friend of mine who runs a company called Airgate in Canada has done just that. She has hired several people in her organization with autism. The skill that they have for her organization, which is a cloud-based partner, has been incredible. And it has allowed her to bring these people with amazing skills into her organization to the point where customers are asking for them on their projects. Their attention to detail that they have brought to their organization is beyond what she's ever seen before. And the impact from an inclusion perspective, she says, has changed the culture of her organization, let alone the individual who was originally bagging groceries and is now a cloud architect and doing fabulously. Think about these opportunities in your business or your team. And human rights cases are real. We're seeing more and more discrimination that's happening with our trans youth, Canada, around the world, and US. And then the proportion of complaints are often around discrimination. And you can see here the top two are disability and race and sexual orientation, etc. And so there's work to be done within some companies more than others. So should diversity inclusion be a core business strategy? The answer is yes. But let's talk a little bit about what is workplace diversity, because it's more than simply not discriminating against somebody. It could also be someone who provides a unique thought or an alternative point of view, difference of opinions, and hiring employees with different backgrounds, whether it's religion, age, sexual orientation, political affiliation, personality, and education, it can truly be invaluable to your organization. And inclusion and belonging is what you do or should do with your employees once they've been hired into your organization or are already there, right? And it really needs to be intentional, programmatic, and engaging for every employee, right? So whether you're a large company or a small company, Microsoft has been masterful at shifting their people strategy. They freely admit they've got more work to do, but they're doing a lot regarding hiring people with abilities and unique abilities. And again, there's a little argument about whether or not this is good for business. We've already seen just some of the stats on revenue growth, profitability growth, employee retention, employee engagement, which are all metrics that companies measure every single day. So let's talk a little bit about product diversity with product development with diversity in mind. So let's go back to G.I. Joe and Barbie of the 60s and think about Mattel back then. These were the toys of choice. And there was no black doll in market. And so they went to their African-American employees for advice on new doll developments. And they brought out, a little while later, their first black doll. And it was the top selling product for a minority market, just because they asked and engaged their employee base to expand their product portfolio. And you can see today from a product development in the age of Barbie, we're seeing dolls of all shapes, all sizes, career-oriented dolls, all being an inspiration for young girls and boys around the globe. It took a long time, but now we're on the path. And then if you think about it for in the superhero universe, we went from G.I. Joe to all of these superheroes, and we've made progress, or they've made progress. It's not my company. I wish I had invested in them. You know, there's Black Panther and Falcon, and well, the Hulk is green, and but we do have some work to be done in this area as well, for sure. But progress is being made, and it's all about product development with diversity in mind. And some of you may have heard this story, but crash test dummies were only built for men. And it wasn't until 2011 when the first crash test dummy was made with a female figure or body in mind. Yet the statistics were very clear that if a woman is in a car accident, she was 47% more likely to be in have serious injuries and 71% to have moderate injuries. And this is less than 10 years ago. You think about virtual assistants, and this is a difficult conversation, but the virtual assistant could very clearly distinguish when someone said, I had a heart attack, or suicide prevention, but it couldn't understand, I have been raped, or sexually assaulted, which more than 20% of women will experience in their lifetime. And the irony of this is virtual assistants' voices are almost always female, yet when they were developed by men for men. And so product development and diversity in mind is making sure all through the development and life cycle of your product, from development, QA, marketing, sales, etc., that diversity is there. A young girl by the name of who was 12 years old, big gamer, girls are gamers too. She realized that of the 50 games that she was playing, only 37 offered free male characters, but only 5 offered free female characters. And she felt that was wrong. And finally, artificial hearts were only made for men. Yet there's a lot of heart disease for women is on the rise. And when the company was originally challenged about this a number of years ago, it said it would cost them too much to change their designs and production for both genders. So this is a call out for those product designers, product developers, that thinking of it with diversity in mind is important, and it can get to the point where it can save lives. So switch gears a little bit and go back to gender and about walking the talk in business. And, we've talked about we're not seeing diversity at the top, but here's a story, and it may resonate for those of you who have women at groups, women at ABC. And this is a story of a company who had about 250, 300 women in the room. And it was their Women's Day, and they were doing training, and they were talking about how they were going to do a better job at kind of the gender imbalance in their organization. And I won't say the name to protect them. But this isn't a picture of them, but it was representative of the people who were on stage talking about how important women are to their business. And this young woman stood up, and she was probably around 25, maybe 27 years old. You can imagine those big rooms where the mics are set up, in a couple of the aisles. And she walks up to the mic and says, I'm really enjoying this day and fabulous training and everything. But all I see on stage are old white dudes. And how can I be inspired to grow my career if there are no women on stage at a women's conference? And this happens lots. How often is there only one woman in the room in your organization? How often is diversity just not part? Religion is also a really important conversation because we live in countries and cities of all cultures, all religions. And our understanding and acceptance is really important. In Canada, we are we like to call it a melting pot of people in Canada, and it just works. But in many cases, we're really not sure about the different observances or faiths that exist. We just don't understand, or we haven't taken the time to understand. And so I've got another story of a company that I've worked with, and someone within their organization is of the Muslim faith. And Muslims do not drink alcohol. It's forbidden as part of their faith for many Muslims. And so what do you do when you have a Christmas party or a holiday party or some kind of event where alcohol is part of this employee gathering? And so this CEO, with a very inclusive mindset, said, okay, well, it's important that all employees feel welcomed and comfortable at our events. And so had a conversation with this employee, so embraced and engaged them in the conversation to say, what should we do? And so they made a decision that the first 2 hours of any employee event where typically alcohol would be part of it, that there would not be any alcohol. And then that employee can choose to stay or choose to go. And in some cases, there's just no alcohol at these events. And it worked out for everybody. And that leader still to this day, as their company is growing and growing and growing, allows everybody to observe their faith in the way that is inclusive in their organization. So again, a quick bias check, right? So we talked about the people on the train. You can imagine people within your business, your community, your friends. Are we making assumptions or assessments about someone because of their looks or how they interview, the tone of their voices, who they choose to love? And everybody does have bias. But if we're checking it and then making the right decisions in a positive, kind, human way, change will happen. And change doesn't have to happen only from the top. It happens from within. And if we look at what's happening with Black Lives Matter today, it's happening from within. Everybody is learning and listening what systematic racism has truly meant for our Black communities. And we're standing with them to support that this has just got to stop. And when we look from a business assessment perspective, how diverse are your teams at every level in your organization? Are managers hiring people just like them? Do you see some teams that are more diverse than others or behind in that diversity? And what might that be? From an inclusion perspective, if you've hired diverse employees only to see them leave within a year, they probably felt like they didn't belong and therefore left. and they could be a top amazing employee for you. Or if you're struggling to hire, and I know we're in different times right now with COVID, but tons of companies say that they're struggling to hire people. Are your hiring criteria just too narrow and you're leaving out so many people that could be great employees for your company? And then how do you measure up against your competition or your leadership peers? Some questions to think about your own team and business. So I'll jump in with 10 best practices to consider for your organization. So first of all, I just mentioned this, change your hiring practices with diversity in mind, right? It's just really important. Now, obviously you want to start with adhering to any kind of federal or national employment equity standards that you have. That's a good start to understand those. Encourage diverse employees that you have today to recruit friends and acquaintances. And go out and meet those cultural organizations for potential applicants. Let them know that you're intentionally wanting to hire a more diverse workforce. They'll actually applaud you for reaching out, and they'll help you find diverse candidates that you're looking for. And if you're using hiring tests within your business, which many do today, Harvard Research did a review recently and said that many hiring tests, when they're put in place, are still used selectively, or the results are just being ignored as some managers just want to hire someone just like them. And even within the small mid-market space, SMB Survey just did a recent poll on the positive side and saying that more and more people with disabilities are being considered for roles. And as I mentioned before, Microsoft as well as SAP have both started programs to recruit employees, whether they're on the autism spectrum or any of those special skills or disabilities, to support them to do great work. Number 2 is create an employee resource group that focuses on inclusion, culture, and diversity. And large companies may have multiple ERGs or employee resource groups, such as LGBTQ, the African community, Black community, women, Indigenous, people with abilities. Lots of different employee resource groups are possible. Veteran groups as well is an important one. And you may be saying, well, I'm not a large enough company to have individual groups, but then you can have one group that truly focuses on how people can work together, collaborate, and support an inclusive culture. And acknowledge holidays, right? Religious or otherwise. It's not about abandoning Christmas. It's really about acknowledging all holidays that your employee base observes. And, think about it in school as children. They truly learn about and celebrate all holidays. And when we get into the work environment, that goes away. And it doesn't mean that everybody is taking those days off. It's just acknowledging those employees that observe those holidays and seek to understand and embrace instead of avoid. The next one is around policy. And company policies can be a wide range of diversity themes. They can be simple, they can be complex, but they absolutely need to include gender, sexual harassment, disabilities, race, religion, and sexual orientation. And while the goal is acceptance, it's really, really important that these policies are in place to better equip your managers and your employees. And then once you have those employees, it's really important that they're communicated, because just because they're written down, it doesn't mean that they'll be clearly understood or even be followed. And that's where training comes in. And training is a great way to communicate these policies. I've seen companies do this with really great examples about these behaviors, or even doing role playing with their employees. And it really helps explain the concerns. It's an open avenue for communication up to the management layers and as well as HR. And then what people should do if they feel they're in an unsafe environment. And education can also mean training on unconscious bias, which has become really popular in organizations today. We touched on various biases, our own or others. And some people don't even realize they have these biases until they get into one of these training opportunities. And what's interesting about bias as well is we tend to share those biases with our children or employees or others. And so while it's important to do these, also remember that one training course doesn't make a D&I strategy or action plan. An effective strategy incorporates all of these things. And then you need to hold people accountable, right? So as business leaders, we know what this means. If people are not meeting their goals, their metrics, their scorecard that they need to be in the business. But we talked about Glassdoor a little bit as well, and bad reviews and poor past employee references can really hurt your future hiring ability. And I've certainly seen it, I'm sure you have as well, in the online social circles, that the chatter's loud out there for bad companies with bad behaviors. So don't let that be your organization, and hold people accountable and take action where there's negative impact regarding diversity and inclusion. And mentoring and buddy systems are still really important, particularly as you're looking to build or grow more diversity within your organization. And it also means an opportunity for more inclusivity in your organization. And so there's many small companies that may have, we'll say, diverse employee number one. And whether that's a woman, whether that's somebody with unique abilities, it's really important that you understand how they'll be welcomed, accepted, and the opportunities that they have in the company. And so, for example, if you hire your first female employee into a team or into your company that may have a strong bro culture for no fault other than it's only been guys so far, you need to think about the change that may need to take place for that woman or those women to feel welcomed. And then be intentional, and be intentional in your hiring practices. It's okay to state and ask, to say, in today's climate, I'm going to hire this person for the role because we want to be more diverse. If someone is willing to stand up and stand forward and let you know that they are part of a diverse population, you need to support them. And so that could mean your next role as a management or leadership position on your team. Are you really thinking about diversity with intention? That person should be a woman. It should be a person of color. It should be somebody with a disability. It should be somebody that is from the LGBTQ2 community. So be intentional with that. And, there's lots of companies now that are going to gender neutral bathrooms. So, rip down those signs if you have to. And then number 10 is really about your surveys and how do you evaluate your diversity progress. Evaluations are commonly used in business. They measure job satisfaction, they measure their happiness in their work environment. But are you really taking the opportunity when you're creating these surveys or questions? Are you keeping diversity questions in mind? Are you looking at inclusion as a way to measure the culture and belonging within your organization? So keep that in mind when developing questions, and then how you respond favorably to favorable and unfavorable results. And so I hope you see that diversity and inclusion is good for business. It's a strength, it truly is. The statistics show it. It's good in business, it's in your community, in your network. And it's from product development with diversity in mind, as we talked about, through to marketing with diversity in mind. Cadbury once put out a chocolate bar. They thought they were doing the right thing, and they thought they'd have dark chocolate and milk chocolate and white chocolate. And they actually thought it would be a good thing from diversity. But it backlashed on them pretty significantly as being insensitive to the real diversity topics and conversations that need to be had. And that's really important from a marketing standpoint. And sales and customer engagement and customer success with diversity in mind. Are you representing your client base out there? And then employee engagement, it's really important to keep the great employees that we want to in our business. And then for those that are joining our businesses today and in the future, that they feel that they're included and they have a place of belonging. And so for my question to you is, what are your diversity, inclusion, or bias goals as a manager, a leader, a teammate, a friend, or even a neighbor? and how we can make change in the world as it relates to that. So that's it for me. So I'm a big Brene Brown fan. So she's an author of Dare to Lead. And she said, employees just want to be safe, seen, heard, respected, and cared for. And I kind of say, don't we all? So that's my discussion today with you on diversity and inclusion. So I'll stop sharing so I can go off. I'll be on video then, I believe.
Yes, you're on video.
Great. So I'm happy to take any questions, any thoughts.
So far, I see Annie said this was amazing. Then personally, I didn't hear about the Women in IT Network before, and I was actually looking at the site while you're presenting. So it looks like an awesome resource that everybody should look into too, especially the resources that you have. I saw some of the global mentoring initiatives that and the virtual stuff you guys are running. So that's awesome.
Yeah, we've got stuff going on every month. We do what we call our We've Got Wit webinars every month. We've got a global virtual community, mentoring circles. As I mentioned, we've got our partnership with Athena where we do emerging leaders. Microsoft have sponsored, as well as Directions Training have sponsored women to do their Azure fundamentals. And we've got all sorts of meetups and networking events that we host. We also have our She-Innovators program, which is targeted at young women. And we've also, from a philanthropic standpoint, done a lot of work in Haiti for young women to help them learn technology skills, remote skills. And matter of fact, 2 of our Haiti girl alumni are been fully trained, and they're both actually applying for a job in Canada at a company who's looking for CRM support, and they will do it from Haiti, so they don't have to leave their country. And so we're doing a lot of amazing things, and yeah, it's just what we hope to continue to do.
Awesome. I see there is a bunch of people, Lisa, Mary Oliveira, who's thanking you for the amazing information. And I see that you also have local meetups. I guess right now they might not be running, but I just saw there's one in Quebec. I'm from Canada as well, by the way, from Montreal.
Oh, fabulous. So we've got so Emily Tissot and Gabrielle Champagne, they're our community leads in Montreal, and they were doing local meetups all the time before COVID. And so we're now encouraging our community leads to run digital ones. So although we all often have, fatigue, I don't want to pick on one brand that's becoming a name, but in collaboration, but we're all on web conferences all the time, but women are still wanting to meet up. And even if our webinars, we have quite a few men that join, and we've got a great one next week on June 30th about women living while Black panel. So we've got 6 amazing women that are going to share with us to listen and learn on what it's like to be a Black woman in tech or in business today, and how we can do a better job together.
Awesome. I think it's important for everybody to understand that whatever, like you said, whoever you are, it doesn't really matter. We all need to be better at this.
Absolutely. And it's just understanding our biases and interviewing tactics, as I mentioned, for those with disabilities. The woman that I had the great fortune to know at Airgate, if someone has autism who have just amazing skills, well, they're not going to interview in a traditional style. You may have to bring them in and get to know them and work with them on a project to understand, what that is. And, by changing some subtle things, you may hire the most amazing employee that'll be the most loyal employee, and your customers will love them as well.
Awesome. Well, I don't see any questions. I see Oliveira says a big hello from outside of Toronto. Mm-hmm. If anybody has any questions, now is the time. Let's give it a few more seconds. If not, this was amazing. Let me stop the recording as well, so we will be able to share this afterwards and